So first question, Hélène Bouzetti, and then we'll go to Glenn McGregor, CTV.
Oui, alors, excusez-moi. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Vous avez dit que
Good
vous avez
afternoon,
demandé
Mr. Trudeau. You said that you asked to be able to participate in the investigation. I'd like to know what response Iran gave you. Are they accepting to have Canada participate? We are working with Ukrainian investigators at this time, and we are continuing to ask to have Canadians involved in this process. And we will continue to have that conversation. That tells me that this is not yet confirmed. Correct. Given the context, do you feel that the U.S. is partly responsible for this, given that they created the situation in which the missiles were launched? I think that's one of the many questions that people will be thinking about and trying to find answers to. For the moment, I just want to underline the importance of having a full and credible investigation so that we can get those facts, and then we can continue to analyze based on those facts.
I think it underscores how important it is that we have a thorough, credible investigation to allow us to then draw conclusions and reflections once we have assessed and established the facts of what happened.
Prime Minister, could you describe in some more detail the kind of information you have that indicates that this was a surface-to-air strike? Because this is, as you know, an extremely serious allegation, and Canadians are going to want to see proof that this is what had happened.
The intelligence and evidence suggests that it is likely that it was a surface-to-air strike, but I will not go into the details of that intelligence at this time.
Given that the Iranians have denied this, and there's reports they're bulldozing the crash site, they've claimed the flight and voice and data recorders have been damaged. Do you trust them that they haven't actually already compromised the investigation at this point? Do you think it's a possibility that we won't get a real answer here? We
have highlighted that it is extremely important that there be a thorough and credible investigation on site of the crash with international partners. The Iranians have indicated that they understand that, but the conclusions we have been able to draw on the preliminary conclusions we've been able to draw based on intelligence and evidence today are clear enough for me to share them with Canadians right now.
So next up, Catherine Levesque, Presse Canadienne.
La Presse Canadienne. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau. Can you tell us now whether Iran has agreed to share the black boxes with Canada or France, and what would be the next steps? For the moment, Iran has said that they will be keeping the black boxes in Iran, but they told Ukrainian President Zelensky that Ukrainian investigators at least would have access to the black boxes.
The Iranian authorities have indicated that they wish to keep the black boxes in Iran, but have indicated to President Zelensky of Ukraine that Ukrainian investigators would have access to those black boxes.
And how can you trust Iran now when they're denying some of the information that you just shared with us? We recognize that this is a situation where we're going to need to get more clarity, more answers, and that's why we are calling for a complete and credible investigation with international partners so that we can uncover the facts of what happened for Canadians, for the families affected, and for people around the world.
Hi, Prime Minister. I just want to circle back to an earlier question. If the intelligence is accurate, then it seems this is the end result of a sequence of events that was sparked by the drone strike ordered by the U.S. president. So given the information you have, how much responsibility does the United States bear for this tragedy?
The evidence suggests that this is the likely cause, but we need to have a full and complete and credible investigation to establish exactly what happened. That is what we are calling for, and that is what we are expecting will happen.
If Iran does not cooperate, and there are some reports of at least minimal cooperation or questionable cooperation to this point, what pressure can you bring to bear? Would you argue for sanctions? Would economic repercussions? What can Canada do to pressure Iran to give you the investigation you want?
I think those are conversations and steps we will contemplate as things move forward if it doesn't appear that there is a credible, complete investigation. But right now we continue to work with partners and direct Iran with our requests that we have a credible and complete investigation.
Okay, going to go to Marie Vastel next, and then afterwards David Aiken.
Oh, OK. Je pensais pas avoir une question. Allô? C'était quoi? Ah oui, pour revenir à
Yeah, so
l'Iran,
to come back to the question of
comment est-ce que vous
Iran,
comptez, si votre conclusion, oui, que c'était
if
un
you're
missile,
concluding that
quelle est votre
this is due to a
réaction? Comment est-ce que
missile
vous
strike,
comptez
what will your reaction be and how do you intend to respond to Iran? Well, first of all, the conclusion that we drew was based on a preliminary analysis of the intelligence that we have, but it just underscores the importance of having a credible and complete investigation into exactly what happened. That's why we're going to proceed with that step before we draw any other conclusions.
Je comprends, mais est-ce que ça
So I understand that,
menace
but
pas, vos relations diplomatiques?
would that not
Parce que,
threaten
avoir
diplomatic
accès aux
relations
victimes,
in
avoir
terms of
accès aussi,
having
est-ce que ça
access
ne
to the site, in terms of the
menace pas notre
repatriation of the
présence en
victims?
Irak
Would that
si
not threaten
effectivement c'est ça qui s'est passé, puis on est en
our
train de se faire
presence in
descendre des bombes
Iraq,
puis
if
faire tirer
that's
dessus sur des bases?
what's
Est-ce que
happening,
la
if people are
directive
launching missiles at the
militaire en
bases?
Irak et dans la région reste la même? Je donne-
So will our
j'imagine
instructions
qu'il y
to
a
our
quelque chose
forces
qui
in
va se
Iraq
passer.
remain the same, or will something change? I imagine something will happen. Well, indeed, this is a very concerning situation. That's why we want to know more. We're going to be working with international authorities and with investigators and with Iran in order to get answers into exactly what happened. We recognize that this may have been done accidentally, but that just makes it even more important to clarify exactly what happened.
David Aiken, and then we'll go down to Christian Noel afterwards.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I just want to come back to the qualifiers you've been using may well have been unintentional. You just a minute ago said it may have been accidental. That implies that it may not have been unintentional. Can you be as definitive as you can be, knowing what you know, knowing what you can't share with us, about the intentionality of this apparent missile strike?
I think that is one of the reasons why it is so important to have a full and credible investigation. Before we get into definitive conclusions, as you say, we need to ensure that we have all the facts gathered. The intelligence and evidence right now suggests very clearly a possible and probable cause for the crash, but it is all the more necessary, therefore, to gather all the evidence to have a complete picture of what happened.
And let's follow through then that the evidence does, in fact, show that it was an accidental, unintentional surface-to-air missile. What range of options would the government of Canada respond in some way to that? And if so, what range of responses might your government consider?
I think anything in the range of responses would need to start from a clear understanding and a credible confirmation of what actually happened, and that is why a proper and full investigation is going to be so important.
Christian Noel, and then we'll go next to Michelle.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Christian Noël, Radio-Canada.
Good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau. Based on what you know now, are you convinced beyond all reasonable doubt that this was a missile and that it was unintentional? Well, to be convinced beyond all doubt, we would need a credible, thorough, and in-depth investigation. And that is exactly what we're calling for. We want a complete investigation. That's what we asked for yesterday, and we're continuing to ask for that today. And those discussions are ongoing. And I want to tell Canadians and families that what we have gathered in terms of intelligence does indicate very clearly that this could very well have been an unintentional surface-to-air missile strike. And for the families of the victims who want answers, if the investigation isn't done with the full cooperation of Iran, how can you reassure Canadians that you're really doing everything possible to get answers and to have a credible, transparent investigation? Well, we understand that investigations of this type do take time. We know that getting a really thorough investigation takes time. This is only the second day, and we're only drawing preliminary conclusions at this time. We do need more clarity for the Canadians and the families who are feeling despair and who are really suffering right now. So we will continue to insist on getting more information and more in-depth investigation.
Hi, Prime Minister. When you spoke with President Zelensky today, had he been briefed by any of his any allies on this intelligence that you've been receiving in the recent hours, or did you have to share this intelligence with him for the first time?
I shared with him some of the reasons we are so intent on having a full and complete investigation. We know that it's extremely important to establish clarity around the facts of what happened, and he assured me that Canada, as a good friend of Ukraine, will be closely involved with them in the investigation into this tragedy.
Okay, so I'll rephrase the question. Did President Zelensky know about this intelligence suggesting that the missile possibly had been used to hit the plane?
I believe there have been media reports about it through much of the day, but I don't know for sure whether he was briefed by intelligence officials or not.
Okay.
Just going to go to the back of the room.
Je crois comprendre que vous n'écartez pas la possibilité.
And correctly, you're not ruling out the possibility that this was intentional. Is that correct? It's really too early to draw any clear conclusions or to rule out any other possibilities. Certainly, we know that we need a more in-depth and credible investigation that will be able to establish beyond any doubt what the causes of this tragic accident were. I know there have been some discussions with other counterparts. Have you tried to talk to your counterparts? I'm willing to talk to anyone in order to get answers in this tragedy.
Given the tensions in the area that were the cause of a drone strike by the United States, do you think that the United States is at least partially responsible for this tragedy?
I think it is too soon to be drawing conclusions or assigning blame or responsibility in whatever proportions. Right now, our focus is on supporting the families that are grieving right across the country and providing what answers we can in a preliminary way. But recognizing that there is going to need to be a full and credible investigation into what exactly happened before we draw any conclusions.
Earlier today, President Trump characterized, said he had concerns that a missile might have brought down the plane, and he said it's a very rough neighborhood. I was wondering what you thought of that characterization.
I'll let Mr. Trump's words stand for themselves.
I'm going to go back to Ryan, National Post.
Prime Minister, we don't have diplomatic relationships with Iran. The country is already heavily sanctioned by the international community. Are you worried in terms of trying to get good behavior like access to the site and participation in the investigation that Canada doesn't have any levers here, that we don't have any leverage to force Iran into better behavior?
We have consular officials who are en route to Ankara, Turkey at this moment, and the Iranian authorities have indicated that they would be open to issuing visas so that consular assistance can be given on the ground.
There are consular officials who are on their way to Turkey, and Iran has indicated that they would be open to issuing visas so that those people would be able to come to the site to support families.
Talked with the Iranian foreign minister. Was he open to allowing Canadians to be part of the investigation? Because their air transport authority says that we have been invited to be part of the investigation.
There has been openness to Canadian involvement in the investigation from the beginning expressed by the Iranians, but Minister Champagne will be holding a press conference in a few hours where he can answer those questions in more detail.
Going to go to Maura Forrest.
Prime Minister, just on that same question, can you be a little more specific? How confident are you that Canadian officials will be involved in this investigation?
Canadian expertise when it comes to air tragedies, to expertise when it comes to crash investigation is world class. We have much to contribute, and we have lost much in the loss of so many Canadian lives, so many families across this country grieving. We will be involved. We will offer all the expertise that we have to offer. We have already been engaged with the Ukrainians, who are part of the investigation team, and Iran has indicated an openness to Canada being engaged as well. To what degree and what way remains to be worked out, but there is an openness there.
And I just wonder what you think Canadian families of the victims must be feeling now, knowing that there is a good possibility that their loved ones have been caught up in this dispute between the U.S. and Iran.
As I said, it is unimaginable what these families are going through right now in terms of grieving just for having lost loved ones. I know from conversations that have been had with government officials, with members of parliament, with my deputy prime minister who's been engaged with families in Edmonton, that families are asking for answers, and that's why we are sharing what we know as we can with Canadians right now. But there are many more answers to be given. There's much more to be found out through a complete and thorough investigation that we are certainly pushing for. But we know these families will continue to be going through extremely difficult moments over the coming hours, days, weeks, months, and indeed years. And Canada will be there with them.
Lee Berthune.
Yes, sir. Just wondering, do you regret not pushing harder to restart diplomatic relations with Iran as you had promised in the 2015 election?
I think there were many reasons why Canada has significant issues with Iran and has for a number of years. But in this situation, it is clear that we are coming together in the wake of a terrible tragedy that has befallen Canadians. It has befallen many Iranian citizens as well. One can't forget that the majority of victims on that airline were Iranian citizens. And this is something that binds us together in our grief. And I think the desire for answers from families who lost loved ones is fairly universal. We will be working together in the best ways that we can around this tragedy.
And you mentioned that you had spoken to Prime Minister Rutte. Can you talk about what advice he gave you, given their experience?
He talked a lot about how it is, first of all, important to keep the families who are grieving apprised of information, even at preliminary stages, which is certainly something that we are doing today. He also talked about the need for direct and real relationships with all different elements involved in the crash. He talked about the fact that he had multiple conversations with Russian authorities, including Vladimir Putin, in the days following the Malaysian Airlines downing. So we certainly have taken those and other elements seriously. Their path through an international investigation that continues even 5 years later was one that he shared with me, and he of course offered the deep friendship that the Dutch have with Canada to serve, to share expertise and information and support as we embark upon what is going to be a difficult process of establishing the truth and the facts of what happened.
Bruce Campion-Smith.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Just wondering if the government considers this an act of war.
I think it is too early to draw definitive conclusions like that one. That is why we need a complete and credible investigation.
And can you just walk us through when you became aware of these most recent allegations involving the aircraft, and also going forward, what Canada's response? Like, are you going to speak to the leadership of Iran yourself to convey Canada's views on this? And should there be an international commission for an investigation?
We got confirmation over the course of last night and this morning on this particular set of conclusions that I've shared today. But obviously there is much more work to be done, much more data to be analyzed, and that's why the credible investigation is so important. I think there is a call, and there are incidents of tragic crashes like these ones, multiple parties who are mandated to be involved, from manufacturers of the airplane, and with France being the engines of the airplane being manufactured in France, that gives a certain authority for the French to be involved as a part of the international investigation process. Countries that have victims on the plane also have standing in an investigation. Canada, of course, is the country outside of Iran that has lost the most citizens. The country of operation and ownership of the aircraft is also responsible, and that has a responsibility in the investigation, and that involves Ukraine. There are many different international elements in an investigation of this type, and that is what we will be drawing on as we move forward.
Okay, guys, we have time for maybe two last quick questions. So one from Rosemary Barton, and then we'll go to John Iveson.
Prime Minister, obviously you suspected, you feared the worst when you were asked whether you could rule out that this had happened. It may have been confirmed overnight, but you obviously had your own concerns. Can you just talk a little bit about what your reaction was when it was confirmed? Were you outraged? Just explain to me what went through your head, knowing that innocent lives were taken.
My first thought is for the families that we have been getting to know over these past 24 hours through news articles and reports back from various conversations they've had with MPs, with government officials. They are already going through a terrible grieving process, and to further have an understanding that this may have been caused by a surface-to-air missile strike is compounding, and that my thoughts instantly went to how much harder this must make it for those families who are experiencing just a terrible amount of grief right now.
My first thoughts were for the families who were already suffering terribly after losing their loved ones. But knowing that there may have been this additional aspect, the missile strike, only makes things harder for them. So we will be there for them in this difficult time.
Prime Minister, if it turns out to have been a missile strike, Canada's options would seem to be pretty limited. Is the Magnitsky Act a tool that could be used against individuals who are deemed to be responsible?
I think it is too early to draw conclusions on what tools could eventually be used, depending on the final assessment or final conclusions of a complete investigation. Our focus right now is on giving immediate support to the families, working with them to ensure that the remains of their loved ones are brought home to Canada, if that is their wishes, and indeed move forward on a full and complete investigation so that we can then look at next steps in the healing, accountability, justice process. These are things that will come in due course, but right now we are standing firmly and entirely with the families.
Okay, guys, thank you very much.
Merci tout le monde.